From Milton Hershey, Chocolate King, Town Builder, by Sharnan Simon. If at first you don't succeed, have you ever had a really wonderful idea, but you couldn't make it work? No matter how hard you tried, it just never turned out the way you wanted it to. There is an old saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. This can be difficult advice to follow. When you keep failing, you want to give up. One man who knew all about trying and failing was Milton Snavely Hershey. He tried to set up his own business many times. Each time he failed miserably. He lost all of his own money and the money of his friends and family. But Milton was stubborn. He knew he had a good idea, and he was determined to make it work. Today, we can all be grateful for Milton Hershey's stubbornness. His good idea was the Hershey Chocolate Company. Thanks to Milton's hard work and determination, we have Hershey's candy bars, chocolate syrup, cocoa, and other treats to sweeten up our world. Milton Hershey made a lot of money from his chocolate company. He wanted to use his money in a worthwhile way. Instead of spending it all on himself, he used his money to help other people. Milton Hershey built an entire town called Hershey, Pennsylvania. In this town, he built homes, schools, and churches. He also built theaters, swimming pools, a sports arena, and an amusement park. Perhaps most importantly, Milton Hershey started a school for disadvantaged children. Milton knew what it was like to be young and penniless. He had no children of his own, but that didn't stop him from wanting to help other children. He gave his entire personal fortune to the school that is named after him. Today, the Milton Hershey School serves more than 1,000 boys and girls. Philanthropist. Milton Hershey was a philanthropist. A philanthropist is a person who helps others by giving them money and other things they need. A philanthropist doesn't expect to receive anything in return. Milton Snavely Hershey was born in the little town of Derry, Pennsylvania, on September 13, 1857. Milton's family had lived in the rolling hills of central Pennsylvania for more than 100 years. His great-grandfather built the farmhouse, called the homestead, in which Milton was born. Milton didn't live in the comfortable stone farmhouse for long, however. His father, Henry, was a dreamer. Henry couldn't seem to settle down to any one job or place to live. He moved his family many times during Milton's childhood. All of this moving made it hard for Milton to get an education. By the time he was 13 years old, he had attended 6 different schools. But Milton's father loved books and reading. He wanted his son to keep going to school. Milton's mother, Fanny, however, was more practical. She thought it was time for her son to learn a trade. Milton's mother and father came to an agreement. Milton would leave school and become a printer's apprentice. An apprentice is a young person who is learning a trade from a skilled person. In Milton Hershey's day, an apprentice usually lived with the person he worked for. Milton's mother was pleased that her son would be learning a trade. His father was happy that Milton would be surrounded by writing and newspapers. Young Milton attended this one-room schoolhouse called the Derry Church School. Unfortunately, Milton wasn't a very good printer's apprentice. After 2 years, Fanny Hershey found another job for her son. Milton would learn to make candy in Joe Royer's ice cream parlor and garden in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Trade. A trade is a job or craft that requires working with your hands or with machines. Carpenters, electricians, mechanics, and printers are all people who have learned a trade. Henry and Fanny Hershey, Milton's parents. Milton liked candy making from the beginning. It was a tricky business, since there were no exact recipes to follow. Joe Royer taught his young apprentice to start with sugar, then add water and flavorings. He showed Milton how to let the mixture boil until just the right moment. Then, together, Joe and Milton poured the candy out onto a big marble counter to cool. Milton learned that he had a special knack for making candy. Customers liked his caramels and peppermints and fudge. After a few years, Milton decided he had learned all he could from Joe Royer. It was time to start his own candy business. Luck was with Milton. His caramel candies, made with fresh milk, were a great success. An Englishman was so impressed with the candies, he ordered a huge supply to be shipped to England. Milton knew the milk would keep his candy fresh even after weeks on an ocean liner. Before he knew it, Milton had more business than he could handle. He borrowed money from the Lancaster National Bank to buy more candy-making equipment. Milton had no trouble paying back the loan. Business kept booming. Everyone seemed to be eating the caramels Milton was making in his Lancaster Caramel Company. There were so many to choose from. McGinty's, Jim Cracks, and Roly-Polies for the children, Lotuses, Paradox, and coconut ices for adults, Melbas, Empires, and Icelets for people who liked their candies made with skimmed milk instead of smooth, rich cream. And all of the different shapes and flavors were invented by Milton Hershey himself. Lancaster Caramel Company, about 1889, where Milton achieved his first great success. Soon Milton had to expand. He built factories in other Pennsylvania cities. He started a branch in New York City and another in Chicago. He shipped his caramels all over the country, and soon all over the world. People everywhere, Japan, China, Australia, and Europe, loved Milton's caramels. As a result of the company's success, Milton was named one of Lancaster's most important citizens in 1889. The Lancaster Caramel Company made Milton Hershey a rich man, but it wasn't caramels that made him famous. In 1893, Milton had an idea that would make Hershey a household name around the world. I want to make chocolate. It all started when Milton visited the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Milton was fascinated by an exhibition of chocolate-making equipment from Germany. He studied the machinery for hours. Then he made up his mind. He would buy the equipment, ship it to Lancaster, and start making chocolate himself. World's Columbian Exposition. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was held to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in North America. It was a giant World's Fair, with exhibits from around the globe. More than 27 million people visited the exposition. Making chocolate was harder than it looked. Milton and his candy makers tried one recipe after another, until they found just the taste they wanted. Eventually, Milton's factory was making 114 different kinds of fancy chocolates. Then, in 1900, Milton Hershey made a big decision. He didn't want to run both a caramel factory and a chocolate factory. From then on, he would only make chocolates. On August 10, 1900, Milton Hershey sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million. He immediately began plans to build a huge new chocolate factory. This factory would be located out in the farmland near Milton's birthplace in Derry, Pennsylvania. Building a factory in the middle of the cornfields made sense to Milton Hershey. There was plenty of land to build on. There was plenty of fresh water. And there were plenty of cows to provide good fresh milk for making delicious chocolates. Milton decided to build his chocolate factory in the farm country near his hometown. Not everyone agreed with Milton. His wife, Kitty, told him he ought to have his head examined. Everyone knew that factories belonged in cities. Besides, she would ask, where would the factory workers live? In a barn? But Milton Hershey had thought of that, too. He promptly began to build a town for his workers. There would be comfortable houses with gardens. There would also be schools, churches, and stores. There would be a post office and a trolley car for transportation. It would be a wonderful town, and it would eventually be named Hershey, Pennsylvania. Kitty Hershey, around the time she married Milton, 1898. Trolley cars. Trolley cars, or streetcars, are a sort of passenger train that roll along rails in city streets. The cars are run by overhead power lines. Many of the streets of Milton's town were given names that refer to chocolate. It all happened just the way Milton Hershey said it would. The Hershey Chocolate Company was soon bigger than anyone could have imagined. And Hershey, Pennsylvania grew into a thriving town with two main streets named Chocolate and Cocoa Avenues. The first houses in Milton's town were built on Trinidad Avenue,